Ironsworn is the best all-in-one solo RPG experience you can have. A game of vows and the adventures that your heroes will live to fulfill them, traveling through dangerous environments and fighting against terrible monsters. And it's free, so there's really no excuse not to check it out. Its author, Sean Tomkin, has just released Ironsworn Delft, its first full-fledged expansion. It's focused mostly on delving inside perilous sites, what we would normally associate with dungeons, but it contains much more than that. Hello and welcome to RPG Tips again. In this video I'm going to show you what Delft contains and give you my honest opinion about it. Let's get to it. Okay, so here we are, right at the cover. As you can see, Sean has decided to go, as he did with Ironsworn, with stock art and photographs, which I think is it's probably not as evocative as other fantasy books, but it works, and it's probably brought down development costs quite a lot, so that's good for him. If we get down, this is the standard typography and layout of Ironsworn, which I think is pretty clean and very easy to read, which is good. If we go to the acknowledgements, we can start to see the influences of Ironsworn, and especially of Ironsworn Delft in this case. Apocalypse World, well, I mean, Ironsworn, even though some people say it's adjacent to PBTA, I think it's quite clear powered by the Apocalypse game. I'm not that interested in getting into fights about what does adjacent mean to that. I don't care. Dungeon World is sort of, well, the fantasy adaptation of Apocalypse World, so it makes sense. And I think that these two are the most interesting influences. The Perilous Wilds and Freebooters on the Frontier are both games with a focus on exploration. Especially the Perilous Wilds, if you followed Trevor Deval's channel, Me, Myself and Die, you'll have seen him using it, and I think it's a very, very good resource. Now, getting down to the index, we can see that this is divided into 8 chapters, which is here. The first one is a summary of what we're going to see. The second one is, I would say, the most important one, because it shows us how to actually delve into the depths, the specific moves that Sean has created to do this, and the core loop, which is here on page 45. Then chapter 3, it's sort of strange, because it's a bunch of different things, different optional rules that you can plug into your games. Then for chapter 4, he jumps back into sites, and if on chapter 2 he gives us the main moves, the main ideas to actually play, in chapter 4 he gives us the flavor of it. 2 concepts, theme and domain, which we will see later, that actually allow you to populate and create very strong narratives just with combinations of short random tables. Additionally, we have 20 side starters to kickstart your imagination. On chapter 3, this is the closest thing to a Bestiary that Ironsworn is going to get. And I say closest because it's such a narrative game that most of the stats are just 2 or 3 lines, so 2 or 3 numbers. Nevertheless, they are greatly detailed and they all have quest ideas, which is very good. For chapter 6, we get threats, which reminded me sort of clocks in Blades in the Dark, and also fronts in Dungeon World, which is basically a way of tracking the evolution of your enemies in a quest. Chapter 7 deals with objects of power, wealth, artifacts, and rarities. Basically, a small increment in mechanics to include the opportunity of using interesting objects. And lastly, chapter 8 is a summary of oracles or random tables, which I'll go over it because I think that some of them can be salvaged not only to play Ironsworn but also to create very interesting things. So starting with chapter 1, this, as I said, was a summary of what we are going to need, how to add Delft to your campaign, what a site and quest means. For instance, this gives us some small examples of what a site is: a haunted barrow, a fortified stronghold, a corrupted tanglewood. And the new moves that Sean implements to actually explore the sites. Discover a site, delve the depths, find an opportunity, reveal the danger. One very good thing that I found when reading this was that most of the moves are actually totally narrative. They are not that tied to Ironsworn's mechanics. Why do I say this is good? Because I'm not that interested in just playing Ironsworn. I like to play mainly the Mythic GM emulator. So having narrative moves that I can plug into my Mythic game and then tie into the mechanics as I like is very good, because it makes the usage of Ironsworn Delft broader than just as an expansion of Ironsworn. We're going to see that later. Now here, in getting started, Sean tells us that the first thing we should do when actually preparing to delve a site is to have an objective. Why should we traverse this? Why should we go inside? And he gives two main ideas, which I think are actually quite general. The first one is it's important for your quest. You may need an object, there may be someone inside, or you have to go through the site in order to reach your destination. And on the right part, we get the first move, discover a site. When you resolve to enter a perilous site in pursuit of an objective, choose the theme and domain, we'll see it later, and give it a rank. If you know a bit about Ironsworn, the rank and the progress, it's just a way of pacing your exploration. Basically a way of how much time do I want to spend here. Thus, it is something that can be easily exported to other games, as I was saying. Here we get a glimpse of the themes and domains. The theme is the condition or state of the site, and it's going to tell you mostly which kinds of encounters and threats you're going to find. And the domain are the physical characteristics of the site. So for instance, a cavern or a shadow fen. The domain is going to give you mostly the actual physical things you're going to find, whereas the theme will tell you which kinds of things you're going to fight or have to overcome. And here on the lower part of the page, we can see two examples of the theme, a corrupted, and domain, a cavern, and how they interact. As you can see, both cards have two random tables, features and dangers. In the corrupted, for instance, we can have mystic runes or markings, or blight or decay. And as dangers, a mystic trap or trigger, or revelations of a terrible truth. In the cavern, we can have features such as a cave pool or twisting passages, or dangers such as a cave-in or flooding. Now I want you to notice one very important thing. This features table on the theme only reaches up to 20, and the features table on the domain starts from 20. So when you decide the theme and the domain of your site, you join them together and you get a whole random table from 1 to 100 of features and then also of dangers. Notice though that dangers table only reaches 30 in the theme and 45 on the domain, because there's another additional dangers random table which is general for everything. I think this is genius. This is an extremely elegant and simple way of joining two ideas. What do I find here and where am I? And making it in a very tactile way. These random tables can also be downloaded as cards and you can print them. So you can even randomize the theme and domain of your site just by picking a card. On the right part, we can see the 8 themes that we can have. Ancient, corrupted, fortified, hallowed, haunted, infested, ravaged, and wild. And also the 12 domains we can have. Barrow, cavern, frozen cavern, ice reach, mine, pass, ruin, sea cave, shadowfen, stronghold, tanglewood, and underkeep. I think that both the themes and domains are quite extensive and comprehensive. Though for the domains, I was a bit surprised about some of the things that Sean chose. For instance, I'm not that sure if a cavern and a frozen cavern are really that different. I mean, of course they are different, but I don't know if it's a difference that you could just include in the narrative, or if 2 different domains were needed. The same way, I don't know if mine was that different from an underkeep, which is just a general dungeon. But, I mean, it's more random tables, which is always good. Then if we continue, this is just mechanics for choosing the theme and the domain. You have to set your playscape. And the standard way of doing it is by using the cheat sheet of moves, the site worksheet, and the 2 cards for the theme and the domain that you've chosen. Lastly, you should give a name, and we're going to see on ChatRate that there's a very good random site name generator. Give the site a rank, which, if you remember from the Discover the Site movement, is just a way of saying, okay, how long do I want this to be? And the denizens. For this, on the site worksheet, we have a space, which is basically a random table, weighted by probability, so we can decide which things are very common, which things do we expect to see more, and which things are very rare. All of this, I would say, it's generally the same ideas, the same core ideas that we've seen in other games, such as creating a random encounter table, but I think that they are executed and joined in such an elegant way that this brings Delft above most of the competition. Here we get a summary, which is always good. I love books that tell me lots of things and then say, hey, here's a page to give you the key points that you should remember from this chapter. And let's go into chapter 2, in which we are going to learn about the Delft Moves, the things, the mechanical bits that we are going to use in order to explore the dungeon. The first one we already saw it, it's Discover a Site, we've already covered it. The second one, and this is probably the main one, is Delve the Depths. When you traverse an area with a perilous sight, envision your surroundings, which is just describe what you see, then consider your approach. If you navigate this area with haste, with stealth or trickery, and with observation, intuition or expertise. As you can see, this can be translated from Ironsworn's mechanics, which is edge or shadow or wits, to anything, with haste, plus dexterity, with stealth or trickery, plus intelligence, with observation, intuition or expertise, plus wisdom. Of course, then you would have to define what a strong hit, a weak hit, and a miss is in your mechanics. In a d20, it may be plus 5 over the DC, for instance, for a strong hit. That doesn't really matter. Most of these mechanics are going to be very simple, and they can all be adapted. Nevertheless, the results are that on a strong hit, you delve deeper, you mark progress, so you advance on this track, and find an opportunity, which is another move that we're going to see later. On a weak hit, you have to roll on the following table, and here's where the selection of which attribute to roll with helps in shaping the narrative. So for instance, if we are doing it with haste, it's more probable to reveal a danger. If we are doing it with stealth or trickery, it's the lowest probability of revealing a danger, but also we have less chances of finding an opportunity. Whereas wits, it's sort of a balanced approach. Again, I'm going to repeat myself a lot, but I think this is very elegant. This is interesting also. On the domain, the first result for the features is the most probable one, and Sean has detailed random tables in such a way that you can assume that the first results on the random table of features for the domain is the default feature that you can traverse through. For instance, here in the sea cave, you traverse watery tunnels. That's very good. It saves you from thinking, okay, now I'm going to go down a slope and maybe I'm going to find a chasm and I have to jump. It doesn't matter. If nothing happens, you can just assume that you're in a watery tunnel and advance. Continuing, this is just an explanation of the same move, which is good in order to understand it, but I mean, the gist of it is what I just explained. You advance and something happens. We're going to see that on the summary. Then the next move, find an opportunity. When you encounter a helpful situation or feature within a site, which, as the move says, can happen as you are delving the depths. You have two options. First, you have to roll on this table and get results such as you are alerted to a potential threat or you get a drop on a denizen. Again, notice that all of these are just narrative results. There's nothing mechanic tied to it. So this can be salvaged straight to your game of preference. Then it's got some small mechanic tidbits like take one momentum or make a move. But I mean, those are small enough that you can just ignore it and use this move, in a completely narrative way. Of course, not if you're playing Ironsworn. I'm doing this from the perspective of salvaging things, of course. Then we have the other movement, the contrary to find an opportunity, which is reveal a danger. And again, narrative results. These are great. And of course, Sean can only do this because he laid out a very solid framework with just the main moves in Ironsworn, that these just are going to give you ideas that you will then translate to Ironsworn moves. Another optional move is check your gear, which is very similar to how this has usually been done. You don't have to track all of your equipment or all of your inventory. You just check to see if you have it. On a strong hit, you just have it. On a weak hit, you have it, but you suffer consequence. You get less supplies in this case. And on a miss, you don't have it, and you have to pay the price. Continuing, locate your objective. This is basically how to finish your exploration. When you finish it, you have to roll 2d10 and compare against your progress. If both are above or equal to your progress, you locate your objective and the situation favors you. On a weak hit, you locate your objective, but you have to face an unforeseen hazard or complication. I think this is a very good thing because most of the time it's going to be a weak hit, I would assume, and it's going to force you to have that last final battle or that last final plot twist, which always enriches the narrative. And on a miss, your objective falls out of reach, you have been misled about the nature of your objective, or you discover that this site holds unexpected depths. This is quite similar to the finished journey move from the base Ironsworn, just adapted to a site. And as we are going to see later, actually, Sean gives us a way of making journeys with the same mechanical framework as exploring another site. Okay, and I think, we have one last move, which is Escape the Depths. When you have to flee or withdraw from a site, you envision with which stat you do it. It's similar to Apocalypse World and most PBTAs. On a weak hit, you have to choose one kind of consequence. Again, this can be exported to your games, but personally, I wouldn't. If I had to flee, I would do it just using the mechanics of my game. And of course, here, Sean reminds us that you can do other moves when you're inside, depending on the narrative. As I said, the base mechanics from Ironsworn are just solid enough that they provide a groundwork for almost everything. That's why he could just define 3 or 4 moves, and then all the foundations for delving inside are already there. And lastly, in this chapter, I think this is the most important thing, the flow of play. How does, from a mechanics point of view, delving inside work? You start, you discover a site, and then you delve depths. Depending on what you get, you either find an opportunity or reveal a danger. You may mark progress. Then you decide if your objective is at hand. If it's not, you just repeat. And if it is, you locate your objectives and escape the depths. That's it. It's deceivingly simple in terms of mechanics, which is always good, but it's very flavorful from a narrative point of view, thanks to 4 things. The find an opportunity move, the reveal a danger move, both having very good generic random tables, and the themes and domains concept, which I think, again, is fantastic, especially with the way that Sean has given us to combine both. Okay, so if we continue, this is a glossary, which is always good. Another example of stock art, which I think it works. Some people I know that don't like it. For me, it's not the best thing ever, but it works. Okay, chapter 3, tuning your experience, finding your path. This is a collection of small rule tweaks that you can apply to your game if you like them. Let's go over them. Managing sites and quests. Here he talks about how to combine your progress inside the exploration with the progress inside a vow. It's interesting, but it's not really that important. Risk zones. This is important. Here he gives a solution of the problem. Well, I want the start of my dungeon to feel safer, and the more I traverse inside, the more dangerous it becomes. He does it thanks to the simplicity of Ironsworn's mechanics by basically changing, based on your progress, the rank of the monsters you're going to find. I see no reason why this kinds of advices couldn't be translated to any kind of OSR, Fate, Savage Worlds, any kind of game. And in fact, it's already been done. Learning from failure is just create a track in which you mark the number of failures you've had on a certain thing, and if you fail too much, then you get experience. It's a way of rewarding it's a way of making the failures not that hurtful. It's nice. Mapping a site and relationship maps. Random advices on how to map conceptually where you've been to and how things are related. It's nice, but it's nothing too innovative. Here, streamlining dice rolls. He tells us different ways of playing with numbers and playing with dice in order to generate the results. The one that I liked was this one, Casting Runes, in which you take a handful of d10, you just roll them, then he gives a mechanic on how to pick them one by one, so that the results are already generated, but you don't know them yet. Of course, the results you're going to generate are going to be the same, but for flavor, it's nice. This advice was something that I had never seen before, and it's cool. Give dice a theme. I think that we all have dice of different colors and different shapes, different textures. Here, this is the first time I've seen someone suggesting exploiting that. So, for instance, here he says, a bright purple die might make you think of royalty or leadership. A black die can suggest secrets or mysteries. A green die represents natural forces. Including that sort of narrative prompts into your results is interesting. I've never done it, but I thought it was an innovative idea. Hacking sites. Here he gives us ways of doing our own themes and domains. For instance, here we have a generic reveal danger table, and how to use different themes or domains if you want to make a haunted fortified stronghold. Again, the mechanics are very simple, so I think it's very good that we get the opportunity of adding a bit more complexity, even though with 8 and 12, we have 96 different sites with 2 themes and 1 domain, or with 1 domain or 2 themes, we would get even more. So it's good. It's always good that Sean has thought about ways of improving this. And lastly, a way of creating your own themes and domains with the blank cards, so you can just fill them. Here he gives us a way of using other dungeons, other materials that we may have. It's not like a direct mechanical translation. It's just a way of, well, extract the important information and fill the theme and domain cards with that. It's nice, but it's nothing groundbreaking. Here, as I said before, Sean gives us a way of setting up a journey as a Delft, which I would only do if that particular journey was dangerous enough, probably. Then a short tip on how to do one-shot Delfts if you're playing with a group or you just have 2 hours to play. And chapter 4, sites. For this chapter, he goes back again to defining the second half of what makes Delft interesting. The first half, for me, I think it's the Delft Moves. And the second one is this one, sites, different themes and domains. Here he talks about sites in alternative settings and how they fit. And again, in a very apocalypse world or dungeon world way, he goes back to your truths. Some small questions that, depending on how they are answered, are going to shape how your sites look. I think they are good narrative prompts, but this is also nothing that we haven't seen before. Getting into themes, here we get a small summary of what they mean and all the random tables. I think they are very good. They are very evocative, and they are simple enough that you can play with them, substitute some results that you don't like, combine them. It's very, very good. I know that I'm repeating myself, but I think that the theme and domain mechanisms are probably the best innovation that this book brings, especially because they can be used with any game. Lastly, for this chapter, Sean gives us 20 different sites, which contain basically the rank, the theme, the domain, the denizens, and some story. It's nice. I usually don't play my games in official settings. I usually homebrew them, so I haven't read this too much, but I assume that Sean crafts a good narrative, so it's good to have. Chapter 5. Okay, so this chapter is basically a bestiary for Ironsworn. First, he tells us how to use the denizens matrix, which, the advices that he gives are good if you're new, but as long as you've done 1 random encounter table for any dungeon, you're going to understand what's happening here, you won't need any help. And then we get into each specific monster. Of course, the bad part of having stock art is that most monsters don't have any image. That's acceptable. One thing that he does, and I really like it, is this quest starter. For each monster, we get a quest idea and also in which kind of site we would find them. I think these are all very good ways to kickstart the imagination of people. Apart from the, well, not lack of mechanics, but simplicity of the mechanics, because each monster is just translated to a rank, he gives us drives and tactics. If you have a bit of expertise with your system of preference, you can very quickly translate these to interesting stats or attacks or tactics. The number of monsters that we get isn't that huge, but I think that it's interesting, and considering that it's not just a stat block, which, there's no stat block, but we also get the quest starters and little tidbits of crafting your world, I think it's interesting enough. One interesting part of this chapter is the anomalies one. An anomaly is something which is not a monster, but an otherworldly feature of the terrain or environment, the embodiment of ancient spirits or forces of nature. In practice, this means, I would say this is the equivalent of a skill challenge or an extended contest or something like that. It's a way of giving a mechanical support to extended fights against something which is not monsters, but it's sort of similar. There's a lot of things here. Interesting, not groundbreaking. One thing that I really like that Sean has done, and I already said it, is these little flowcharts. Having this makes understanding things super easy. And even though I don't think that the anomalies and scene challenge things are extremely interesting, if you're playing Ironsworn and you want to implement this, having this is invaluable. Okay, so then he gives us 6 examples of the anomalies. And we reach chapter 6, Threats. Threats, as he says here, are an optional mechanic for your Ironsworn campaign which will make the forces in your world more active and responsive. Your vows will gain new urgency as threats work against you. This is a way of defining mechanically how your enemy advances. We've seen something similar, well, not in the channel, but you can see something similar in Scarlet Heroes, which has victory points, and in Blades in the Dark, which uses clocks. So, to introduce a threat, here in Ironsworn, your threats are tied to your Iron vows. So when you swear one, you tie that to a threat. So, for instance, you vow to protect the Ironlands from a rampaging horde of undead. The threat is the relentless undead army. You vow to prevent a conflict between the Ironlanders and the Elves. The threat is an all-out war. You have to name it and write it below your vow in your character sheet. The next pages are just advices and explanations on how to use the threats, but the interesting things are the mechanics for me here. So, tracking a threat. Basically, when something happens that would prompt you to think that the threat has advanced, then you would make the advance a threat move. Here he gives us how to trigger the move, which is you choose to ignore a situation or deal with more pressing matters. You fail in a critical moment, or time passes, basically. And to advance a threat, you roll 1d100. In the worst result, you may be able to stop their advancement, and if you do, you can reach a milestone. If not, you mark menace, which menace just means the marking the progress track of your threat. In the medium result, you just mark menace, and in the worst result, you mark menace twice. I think it's simple, effective, and it probably could be tied with Dungeon World fronts, because basically they both trigger from the same place. For downtime, here Sean ties your downtime to the threat, because if you take a rest, then your threat may advance. So if you take a hiatus, when you spend an extended time recovering a safe place, you can clear any marked conditions, set your stats to the maximum values, and reset your momentum, and then you have to advance the threats, which is a way of, well, yes, you can rest, but the threats don't. As it usually happens with Apocalypse World, I think this is a good codification of what should usually be happening behind the scenes, how GMs should be working. Since we are in a solo environment, I think it's a good way of tracking it. Then lastly, what happens if your threat succeeds, if you fulfill your goal, or if you forsake it. Now we get more tips, some small advice on how to use it, and we reach chapter 7, Objects of Power. The Objects of Power chapter is composed of 3 subsections: wealth, artifacts, and rarities. Wealth, normally it's not tracked in Ironsworn, it's a mostly narrative game, but there may be people who are interested in just getting lots of gold. And for that, the way that Sean proposes to do it is to create a new path which is called Fortune Hunter, an asset, something that you can have, something you can choose in character selection or acquired through your experience. The way to use it is that when you swear an iron vow in which you are promised payment, you check that, and when you finish it, you are going to get a number of wealth equal to the rank of the vow that you fulfilled. Then, when you add new abilities here, you can use that wealth to do stuff. Well, the first one already allows you to leverage wealth when making a move, to add plus wealth and suffer -1 wealth. That's the base ability. Then you can suffer -1 wealth to take +2 supply when you're trading. And lastly, when you are resupplying by scavenging or looting, you can get less supply instead of +2, only get +1, but increase your wealth by 1. And basically that's the way that Sean proposes to use wealth. I think it's good and contained, which is aligned with all of the other paths and assets. And while it's not something that's super specific, this first ability, the add plus wealth and suffer -1 wealth, I think covers the whole, well, yeah, shut them up with money thing. I hurt my throat today by trying to sing Judas Priest. Anyway, next thing on chapter 7 is artifacts. And artifacts, in other games, we envision them as something like, I don't know, the Deck of Many Things or the Hand of Vecna, things that completely shatter your campaign. Here, Sean has decided to go completely the other way. They should have a strong narrative effect, they should change the world and the story, but they shouldn't have an ongoing mechanical effect. So, for instance, an artifact may give you the opportunity to avoid a perilous journey or reduce the rank of a significant journey, or it may be the answer to a perplexing mystery. But as he says here, if the artifact becomes permanent part of your character and it is not represented as an asset or rarity, it shouldn't provide ongoing mechanical benefits. It might provide texture to your character or limited narrative benefits and costs. Make it part of the story. And then he gives us some examples of how he thinks artifacts should exist in your campaign. For instance, the Abyssal Harpoon is a legendary weapon forged in the fires of lava flow at the edge of the ocean, and it has the power to pierce the hide of even the mightiest sea beasts. It is rumored to be held by a clan of Mero in a hallowed sea cave, tying to the sites. Good. The role in your story is that if you're fighting a powerful Leviathan, obtaining this harpoon may be a milestone, first ephemeral mechanic effect, and when you fight that Leviathan, you can reduce its rank from epic to extreme. I think this is an interesting approach to artifacts, and I sort of understand why he has done it. It's because he tries to focus on the narrative and to have contained mechanic and contained heroes. Ironsworn is not a story of superheroes and demigods that crash oppositions and fight against kaijus and stuff like that. Ironsworn is a story of normal people who do impossible things. In that way, in that mindset, these kinds of artifacts work well. At the same time, I also miss the possibility of a larger-than-life mechanical effect. But I think that it is aligned with the tone of the game, at least. The last part of Chapter 7 is called Rarities, and it is about objects of power, things that go down through generations and have interesting powers. From a narrative point of view, it is interesting and a bit ironic that artifacts, which are supposed to be world-shattering things, don't have a strong mechanical effect, and rarities, which is a way of giving sort of magical objects to your character, usually have a more clearly defined and strong mechanical effect. The way that rarities work is that they are tied to an asset, which in Ironsworn, in base Ironsworn, an asset is basically either an object or a ritual you can do or the equivalent of the class. You can be a ranger or stuff like that. And what they do is they augment that asset. They give you a new move, which is defined here, wield the rarity. When you make a move aided by an augmented asset, you'll roll your rarity die in place of your action die. And it is going to have positive benefits, random positive benefits, like add something or take more momentum or inflict harm. In practice, they can be understood as something akin to stunts in the Fate system. So basically they give you specific mechanical bonuses when a narrative situation happens. For instance, when you enter the fray by barraging your foe with sling bullets, inflict harm on strong hit. Or when you heal a companion, ally, or other character and score a hit, take +1 spirit or +1 momentum. It is basically when something happens tied to the asset that you have, something additional happens. Why Sean decided to tie them to assets, I don't know, but it reinforces the narrative weight of those assets. Could you have rarities that are not tied to that specific asset? Probably you could. Overall, I think they are an interesting additional system to Ironsworn. Here he gives us lots of interesting examples for rarities, but without specific mechanical effects. You should have to define those. And if I'm not wrong, we reach Chapter 8, Oracles. Yes, here it is. Now, as a solo gamer that plays with lots of different systems and a hoarder of different random tables, this is a chapter that I looked at first when I bought the book 2 days ago. It's very good. I think there are certain tables that haven't appeared, or at least I haven't seen in any other kind of game, and that can fulfill certain things that are interesting and needed in solo games. Let's go over them. So here first we have 2 feature tables, which are used to describe your features in your sites. So basically they could be the equivalent of the description tables in the GME. We have an aspect and a focus, generating things like sacred person, okay, yes, thank you, sacred person, or defended trap, or crafted alarm. So you can see these are much more focused than the description table from the GME because these are thought specifically for sites with these themes and domains. This is very good. This is something I was thinking, well, actually commenting yesterday with people on the Discord server. You can have different random tables. The completely generic and abstract ones are very good to have as a fallback. When nothing else works, those are going to give you something good. But if you can get something specific, but not too specific, that can be even better. The dangers of having too specific things is that probably you're going to get just something that really doesn't fit with what you have. These kinds of tables, which I would say are probably a hybrid between specific and abstract, are marvelous because they are going to generate abstract enough results that you can fit them with almost anything, but flavorful and specific enough results that it's going to be very easy to generate interesting things. So depending on the kind of site you are delving, or even the weapon you're describing or anything, you're going to get different results with the same roles. The next generator is called the site name, and it shown here gives us a way of naming our sites with different structures. Yesterday I implemented these sites in my scripts, in my RStudio scripts. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you should go and see my video called How I Play My Games. And I think this generator is good. It generates names which are a bit more contained, a bit more, well, less fantastical than some others. I basically have used and use 3 different name generators, the one from The Perilous Wilds, the one from Into the Weird and Wild, and this one. And this one I would say that in my opinion is in second place, being the first one, Into the Weird and Wild. It's quite good. It is associated with 4 different tables: the description, detail, namesake, in which we have example names that you can use whichever names you want, and the place names that, given the domain you are in, change the place name. So you could be in a briar if you're in a tanglewood, or in the depths if you're in a cavern. Remember when I said that caverns and frozen caverns weren't that different? Here, the table for caverns and frozen caverns are actually the same results. Then we get random tables for themes and domains, nothing too flashy. Then we get character disposition, which, if I'm not wrong, this one's taken just as is from Ironsworn, and character activity. This is a very good counterpart from the one we had in Ironsworn, which was character goals. So you can combine them to see, okay, what does he want and what is he doing right now to achieve that? Or just, what is a monster doing when I reach its lair? Then we get random tables to generate monstrosities with their form, their characteristics, and their abilities. I think this is a good alternative to the Creature Crafter. The Creature Crafter is a bit more in-depth, but if you want to generate quickly a good monster and you know how to plug the mechanics over a narrative result, then it's very good. Then we get 2 tables for traps, which is something that I hadn't seen before. Stuff like change fire or drop stone. I mean, drop stone is quite clear, but things like, I don't know, move poison. Again, this is sort of the perfect point between abstract and concrete enough that you can very quickly think of 2 or 3 things that are going to be very interesting. And then we hit another stellar spot for me, the combat event tables. In the original Ironsworn, there's a table which has combat actions, specific things that your enemy may do. And those, even though they are very good, they suffer from what I said before. They are sometimes too specific, so it's hard to plug them into a narrative. Here, Sean captures again the right point of random tables, in which we have 50 times 50 results, which are abstract enough that can serve for any monster. So, as I was saying in the Discord yesterday, you could very quickly generate tactics and vulnerabilities of a monster. So, let's say you're fighting against an orc chieftain, and the orc is very good doing seize companion, so he's going to focus on your friends, and he's vulnerable to coordinate anger. So if people are able to convince the orcs that don't like the chieftain to attack them, they'll be able to have friends in the battle. As you can see, it's very easy, it's very quick to generate things. Then we get tactics from different threats. If you don't know exactly which enemy you're fighting, here you get 10 different tactics depending on the category of threat you have. These are good, but I don't see myself using them that much. And lastly, we've reached the appendix. The first one is a summary of the Delft Moves, which is very good if you want to print them, though you have a cheat sheet available somewhere else. then optional moves, and an index, which is always something good to have. And we've reached the end of Delft. So let's quickly go over some interesting things. Is it worth it to buy the PDF, which is around $13, I think? Yes, I would say so. The method for creating sites is very interesting. The themes and domains mechanics is marvelous. The pacing mechanism for exploring things with the Delft Move is something that I could see myself using in place of the location crafter, because it doesn't force me to create things beforehand with its already set cards of themes and domains. Of course, if you're an Ironsworn player, the rest of the things are going to also be very valuable. I just don't see them as something revolutionary or like stellar achievements or contributions of the book. If you don't play Ironsworn, I say that you could salvage Chapter 2, which is the moves, Chapter 4 with the descriptions of the themes and the domains, and Chapter 8. There are several random tables that I've already included in my scripts, and I'm going to use them because they are very, very good. The traps, the combat actions, the place descriptions, they are super laser focused, but not too specific. It's something that it's come up in some conversations we've had in the Discord. There are very good books which have very flavorful results, but they are so specific that they just destroy your narrative because they don't fit your story. These combinations of two words are not that specific, but they are focused enough to generate very good results very easily. I wouldn't say the book is a masterpiece, because there are some chapters which, I mean, they are nice, but they are not revolutionary. But I would say it's a very solid product, and it's definitely worth it. And that was the video. It's good to be back. I always say the same. I let the channel go through, but I've had some rough months with a bit of stress, doing lots of things, and basically stressing over not doing things, which I know that some people know of. But it's good to be back. I'm planning on doing another video on which mechanics, just random mechanics, let's say clocks from Blades in Dark or the 3-action turn from Pathfinder 2nd Edition, things that I found and written down that I think that could be applied to your solo games with not too much hassle and could improve them. I'm also planning on recording myself playing someday, but I mean, that's a lot of work. I don't know. Maybe I'll do it. Who knows? If you're interested in a specific video, you have something that you would like me to record, just put it in the comments. I can't guarantee that I'll do it, but definitely it's good to know that people have interest in something. If you have any doubts related to mainly solo RPGs or just want to talk about RPGs, just come to the Discord. We're a nice bunch of people and we'll be happy to welcome you. And yep, I think that's all. So, as always, I hope you've had fun, I hope you've learned something, and I hope to see you again in the next video, which hopefully will be in less than 4 or 5 months. Bye!